Your heart stops, and for the next 30 seconds, your brain does something nobody expected. Not silence, not a slow fade to black, a surge. And not just any activity, the specific electrical signature your brain produces when it is pulling up a memory. For almost the entire history of medicine, this was a closed door. Death was the one experience nobody ever came back from carrying data. We had stories from people who nearly died. We had guesses. That was all. And then, in a hospital room in Vancouver, an 87-year-old man died by accident in front of the only machine that could have recorded it. Today we are going to look at what that machine saw, what your brain actually does in its final minutes, why some people with advanced dementia suddenly wake up, recognize their children, and speak clearly for the first time in years, hours before they die. And at the end, a question that neuroscience genuinely cannot answer, whether anybody is home for any of it. Start with something most people get wrong. Death is not an event. It is a process. We picture it as a switch, alive, then not alive, with a clean line drawn between the two. For a long time, medicine thought roughly the same thing. The heart stops, and that is the end of it. But the heart stopping is only the beginning of the sequence. When circulation ends, your brain does not switch off. It loses its oxygen supply and its fuel, and it begins to fail. The failing takes time. Neurons hold their charge for seconds after the blood stops moving. Some regions go quiet before others. The system comes apart in stages, in a particular order, and not all at once. That gap between the moment the heart stops and the moment the brain finally goes dark is one of the strangest windows in human biology. It lasts a few minutes at most, and until very recently, nobody had ever watched it happen from the inside. There is a reason for that, and it is not a lack of curiosity. It is that you cannot study this. You cannot ethically arrange for a person to die inside a brain scanner. You cannot schedule it. Death arrives without an appointment, almost never in a room full of the right equipment. Which is why what happened in Vancouver is so strange. An 87-year-old man arrived at the hospital after a fall. Scans showed bleeding inside his skull. He was taken into surgery. For 2 days afterward, he was stable. Then he began to deteriorate, and he started having seizures. Because of the seizures, his doctors did the ordinary, standard thing. They attached electrodes to his scalp and began recording his brain activity continuously, watching for seizure patterns, an EEG. And while those electrodes were still on his head, his heart stopped. Nobody planned this. Nobody could have. But there it was, a machine already running, already recording, at the exact moment a human being crossed out of life. As far as anyone knows, it was the first continuous recording ever made of a dying human brain. What it captured was not what anyone had predicted. In the 30 seconds before his heart stopped, and in the 30 seconds after, his brain produced a surge of gamma waves. Gamma is the fastest rhythm the brain makes. It appears when the brain is working hard, concentrating, perceiving, binding information together. And most interestingly for us, it appears when you retrieve a memory. When you reach into storage, pull something out, and re-experience it, gamma is part of what that looks like from the outside. It also shows up when you dream and in deep meditation. So here is a brain with no circulation, a brain that is minutes from being permanently gone, and instead of going quiet, it produces the electrical signature of intense inner experience. This was not completely without precedent. Years earlier, researchers had seen something similar in rats. After cardiac arrest, the rodent brain generated a burst of gamma activity lasting roughly 30 seconds. At the time, it was filed away as a curiosity. Now, there was a human case that looked like the same thing. And of course, everyone immediately thought of the same story. The oldest story we have about dying. Your life flashing before your eyes. I want to slow down here, because this is exactly where most videos on this subject stop being honest with you. That interpretation is a guess. A reasonable one, but a guess. Gamma waves correlate with memory retrieval. They do not prove that a memory is being retrieved. And this particular brain was in very poor condition. It had been bleeding. It was swollen. It was seizing. It was carrying significant doses of anticonvulsant medication. There was no healthy baseline recording of this man's brain to compare anything against. One damaged brain is not a finding. It is a lead. But it was a lead worth following. And people did follow it. If you want to know where it went, stay with me. It gets stranger and more careful at the same time. Subscribe and we'll keep going down. A research team set out to capture this deliberately. They identified 4 patients who were dying in hospital, whose hearts stopped while brain monitoring was already in place. These were comatose patients being removed from life support with the consent of their families. 2 of the 4 showed it, the same surge, fast gamma activity, climbing as the body failed underneath it. And this time, with better recording, they could see where in the brain it was happening. The activity concentrated in a region called the temporoparietal junction, the place where the temporal and parietal lobes meet, behind and slightly above the ear. That location matters. It is one of the areas that becomes active during dreaming. It is also implicated in out-of-body experiences, where a person feels themselves floating outside their own body, looking down at it. A dying brain was lighting up in precisely the region associated with the experiences that dying people describe. That is a remarkable sentence to be able to write. It is also, still, 4 patients, and only 2 of them showed the effect at all. The researchers themselves were direct about the limits and about the deepest problem in this entire field. None of those patients survived, so there is nobody to ask. We can watch a brain produce the electrical signature of vivid inner experience, and we can never know whether there was an experience. The recording tells us the machinery was running. It cannot tell us whether anyone was inside. There is one more source of evidence, and it comes from the other direction, from people whose hearts stopped and who did come back. Large studies of cardiac arrest survivors have found something consistent. A subset of these patients report memories, not vague impressions, structured recollections, events, coherent themes, from a period when their heart was not beating and their brain, by every conventional assumption, should have been incapable of forming anything at all. That does not prove the brain was conscious. Memory is unreliable, and the mind is very good at constructing a story after the fact to fill a gap. But combined with the recordings, it points in an uncomfortable direction. The assumption that everything stops the instant the heart does may simply be wrong. There is another phenomenon sitting next to all of this, and honestly, it is harder to explain than the gamma surge. Picture someone with advanced dementia, late stage. They have not recognized their own children in years. They cannot hold a conversation, or feed themselves, or complete a sentence. The damage inside their brain is extensive, physical, and irreversible. And then, sometimes, in the hours or days before they die, they come back. They open their eyes and use their daughter's name. They ask about something from 40 years ago, accurately. They make a joke that everyone in the room recognizes as theirs, the way they used to make it. In one documented case, a man asked for a cigarette and a beer, sang songs with his family and friends, talked with them, and went to bed. He died the next morning. Researchers gave this a name in 2009, terminal lucidity. For a long time, it lived in the category of things nurses and hospice workers all knew about and science had never touched. That has changed. It's now being studied properly with funded prospective research. In one study following people with severe dementia, more than 60% of the families reported at least one episode of unexpected clarity. This is not rare. It is common enough that if you work in end-of-life care, you have almost certainly seen it. And here is what makes it genuinely difficult. Dementia is not a software problem. It is not a matter of files being temporarily inaccessible. It is physical destruction of brain tissue. those neurons are gone. They do not grow back. So how does a brain with that much structural damage produce coherent speech, accurate memory, and recognition of specific people, when it could not do any of those things for years? Nobody knows. That is not me building drama. There is no accepted mechanism. Researchers have suggested that changes in brain activity near the end of life might be involved, possibly connected to the same kind of surge we've been talking about. But nothing explains why abilities that were assumed permanently destroyed briefly return. One honest note, because this matters if you have watched it happen to someone. These episodes do not always mean death is hours away. Some of them occur months before. And for the families who witness them, they are almost always described afterward not as something frightening, but as a gift. A last conversation nobody expected to get. So what do we actually have? We have solid evidence that a dying brain does not simply switch off, that it moves through structured, patterned activity as it fails, that in at least some cases, that activity looks, electrically, like a brain remembering or dreaming. We have people with physically destroyed brains briefly speaking clearly, and nobody able to say why. And we have no way, none at all, to get inside any of it. This is the wall. Every science of consciousness eventually runs into it, but here it stands at its most absolute. The only people who could tell us what dying is like are the people it happened to. And the defining characteristic of that group is that they cannot report back, which leaves the question in its rawest possible form. If the last thing your brain does is produce the electrical signature of memory, is somebody there, watching it? Is dying an experience? Or is it a system falling apart in a pattern that happens to resemble one? Nobody can tell you. Not now, and possibly not ever. But something has changed, and it's worth sitting with. For the entire history of our species, the final minute of a human life was pure darkness. No data, only stories told by people who weren't there. Now there is a recording. A short one from a damaged brain that raises far more than it settles. It isn't an answer. It's the first time anyone has been able to look. If you want to keep looking into the places we're not supposed to be able to see, subscribe. There are more of them than you'd think. And tell me in the comments, do you think that surge means something? Or is it just machinery running down in an interesting shape?